Baldurs Gate 3 dropped on the 3rd of August and almost immediately stole the show. Just about every person who played it on those magical first few days, including myself, knew that it was an absolute cinch for Game of the Year. Sorry guys, it's not personal, BG3 just hit different. The game has been so popular since launching that Microsoft has changed its rules regarding feature parity on the Xbox Series X and S, just so that they could get this game on their platform sooner. They didn't even do that for Halo Infinite. The game is amazing to play, it has no microtransactions, and after beating the game, I went back to look at my initial notes to find that I had title ideas such as Baldurs Gate 3, a lesson in how to make the perfect video game, and Baldurs Gate 3, Game of the Decade. Now I'm going to leave you with no doubt before diving in. I loved the great majority of my extensive time in this game. It did however hit a point at the end where Baldurs Gate 3 left me feeling blue-balled and alone.
Ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine.
I will get to that later however, so in the meantime, please sit back and enjoy the review. It has no major spoilers, and remember,
for the absolute.
Before we dive in however, I wanted to take some time to briefly explain Baldurs Gate 3 and explain what type of game it is. For those of you who are already aware of that and would just want to have your opinions validated or to yell at me in the comments, skip to the great part of the video and save yourself some time. With that out of the way, it's important to understand that Baldurs Gate 3 is a turn-based RPG that uses a modified version of the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rule set. This means that the game bases every single thing that happens, from how hard your weapons hit to how well a conversation goes, on dice rolls. Different modifiers can impact those rolls. For example, a very charismatic character is going to have an easier time in diplomacy, while a barbarian character doesn't really need to worry about diplomacy because dead men tell no tales. Except in this game where the dead can definitely talk.
Fantastic. Where's the shovel?
It also means that you get to have a party. You get to play your own character, and do not worry, you definitely are the main character, but don't let that fool you. This is a game that's meant to be enjoyed with a party full of friends, whether they're real or they're in-game NPCs, and has story implications for both. If you're a bit of a loner like me, do not worry because the game's NPCs are fully fleshed out and all of them are worth having in your party. If you have too many of those things called friends though, also do not worry because this game features a highly optimized multiplayer system that even features local co-op. With that being said, grab your party and a beer and let's begin. Now I'm going to get this out of the way first since it really doesn't have much to do with the actual game itself, but as I said in the intro, there's no microtransactions. Larian is a studio that likes to give their players the full experience from the get-go, and trust me, at 60 hours for people who rush the game instead of savoring like the fine wine it is, a full experience is what you're gonna get. Don't let the pretty intense length scare you however. This isn't a case of it being an Ubisoft game where you are doing the exact same content over and over, climbing the same stupid towers to unlock even more map. No, no, no. Baldurs Gate 3 is filled to the brim with places to explore, interesting quests to complete, NPCs to betray, bosses to kill, party members to romance, and many, many more. This here is really where the magic starts. Larian have absolutely hit the nail on the head when it comes to capturing the magic of D&D in this video game. Every choice feels real. Every path you head down feels like it's taking you somewhere magical, and exploration feels amazing. And I'm not talking about simply being rewarded for finding an Easter egg or slightly hidden path. I'm talking about genuine exploration and all the dopamine and other giddiness-inducing chemicals that come with. You as the player are given all of the agency in the world to play the game how you want to play. Now this isn't absolute and perfect, this is a video game with limitations to its code after all, but goddamn is it close. I've had conversations with my friends who played up to similar points in their own games, making seemingly the same goody two-shoes decisions who have had vastly different experiences to each other. In one particular case, my friend said to me, "Wait, there was laser beams in that room?" The perfect example of this is from when my friend and I were discussing our favourite moments so far in the game. Our other friend, who was a fair bit behind us by this point, commented on a spider boss that he had found. Now my original friend and I had no idea where this boss was located, and this is after we thought we had explored that area pretty damn thoroughly. Now I know why I missed them, and it's not because I wasn't paying attention, or because I was rushing, or because I'm small-brained. All three of those things are true of course, but no. The reason why I missed those things is because of the sheer amount of content that the game has to offer. For every moment I missed in Act 1 and 2, I experienced so much amazing content and had so much fun that it didn't matter. I still spent 30 plus hours in Act 1 alone, just playing through, clapping cheeks with my almighty paladin, having an absolute blast doing so.
Someone there.
Now, all of that sounds fantastic, and it really is, but in reality, having lots of stuff to do and things to explore doesn't necessarily translate into being an industry-shaking game. No Man's Sky at its release had an absolute ton to explore, but its ocean of content was as deep as the puddle that forms in my driveway after 12 minutes of rain. On the other hand, every MMO out there features an insane amount of content to churn through in the form of enemies, bosses and dungeons, but all of these games get called either boring or repetitive after barely a few hours by the very people that these games were made for. What I believe sets Baldurs Gate 3 apart from all of the competition are the three pillars of the game that I can see when playing. Now, I haven't done any research into this concept to see if this is actually what the developers went for when making the game, but fuck it, here goes. To start with, I won't be commenting on things like combat, story, music, or any of the other usual suspects when discussing what makes a great game just yet. I will be discussing those in a few minutes, but I don't believe they are what gives the game its Game of the Year contention status. Instead, I believe it boils down to these three pillars: reactivity, choice, and scope. When wandering around the world of Faerun, living your character's best life, the game will react to your actions and punish or reward you in kind. Be you a bard who wants to avoid combat at all costs, a paladin who sees evil and goes,
Anyway, I started blasting. Bah! Bah!
or a character so twisted and evil that they treat squirrels the same way they treat soccer balls. It doesn't matter what you do, the game can and will react to your actions to an almost unbelievable degree. To put it simply, the effort the devs have put in to make sure that you can have an experience that doesn't feel railroaded while also feeling boring is astounding. There are of course limits to this, but they are akin to the speed of light in how difficult they are to reach. Quest will give you a relatively simple directive, and from that point on, it really is up to you in most cases how you want to achieve your goal. And the devs have thought about just about everything the player can do and have programmed a reaction to all of those things. This honestly barely scratches the surface of the reactivity side, and it's hard for me to describe without simply saying over and over again that it's fantastic. Quests can also uncomplete themselves as new information comes up, or even better, entire new quests can appear out of the ashes of old ones if you Sherlock at them hard enough. It doesn't end there, however. While playing, you will notice that there are dialogue options only available to specific races or classes. For example, my second character had a moment where a specific evil dialogue came up exclusive to her because she was a Lolth worshipping bard. This gives me the impression that I was one of very few people to experience this particular interaction in the way it panned out, because my race is one of like 20 and my class is one of 12. I've experienced similar situations countless times across my two campaigns as well, to the point where it is more common than not to have dialogue that is specific to your character. Compare this to other similar games that promise the same thing, and Baldurs Gate 3 knocks them out of the park. Imagine having old mate Todd Howard explain his game, except this time, the game actually does what he claims it to. That's how good it is. Moving on to choices now, and I'm just going to say it, there's too many of them. Time after time when playing this game, you will come across situations where you have groundbreaking decisions to make. Do I help the Chongus mushroom take over the other mushrooms? What will happen if I do? Are the other mushrooms worthy of living, or is this mushroom just a dick? I don't know. Mushroom conundrums aside, the game really does its best to let you play your own unique campaign. Most encounters have multiple ways to tackle them, and the campaign isn't just your standard issue, here's the good path, here's the evil path affair. A lot of the side content that you absolutely need to play through, by the way, you're hurting your own enjoyment if you don't, directly impacts your campaign as you play it, and it's crazy to see how your character's choices impact what happens throughout the game multiple hours down the line. This abundance of choices just about everywhere you go, combined with the D&D atmosphere that is captured so perfectly and the god tier level of reactivity that is programmed into the game, creates an atmosphere that you thoroughly believe is yours and yours alone every single time. It is so easy to think to yourself, I bet I am one of only like 17 people to have experienced this moment, because the game creates those moments for you in a way that feels so authentic that other people could only experience what you did if they literally copied every single move you have. Third up on this majestic list of pillars is scope. Remember when you were playing Skyrim for the first time and you were clearing your 11th Draugr dungeon? You just fought another dragon priest? Man, those guys were low-key harder than any dragon I ever fought in that game. Anyway, remember finishing one of those dungeons only to see an elevator that casually takes you into Blackreach, walking around for a hot minute before you realize you can't even see the ceiling and the nearest bridge from you is further than Whiterun is from Rurikstead? This is very similar to how you often feel playing Baldurs Gate 3. Let me explain. The guy whose job it was to keep the development team at Larian from going overboard had to have called in sick every day of the week because, man, everything is done to such an impressive scale and level that half the dungeons or dungeon-like experiences for things that are definitely not dungeons would be the main selling point for most other lower tier games. Take this dungeon for example, which is probably more of a gigantic, elaborate, explorative puzzle than actual dungeon, but this bad boy had me exploring for literal hours before I was ready to leave. The verticality, the hidden areas, the sheer feeling that I had when playing through and discovering this behemoth of gothic emo amazingness was, to put it simply, awe-inspiring. Now, not every area has this level of depth, I'm not even sure if that's the right word to use to it, but every single unique area that you visit, especially in the third act of the game, the one that relies the most on these moments, is fantastic and memorable. This emphasis on bigger, grander, and more epic doesn't really ever stop when playing through the game either. Now, I don't mean to imply that this is just one giant reverse Russian doll constantly trying to outdo itself in a Michael Bay style dick measuring contest. Instead, I more mean that every environment, quest, area, and everything that can conceivably be in between is built to amaze the player, and let me tell you now, that is just what it does. All of this culminates in a gaming experience that, for the majority of the game at least, is magical. The essence of D&D is captured beautifully, there is a real sense of adventure, your failures in true D&D fashion can easily be turned into wins due to the memorable moments that they create, and if at this point in the video you feel a strong urge to go and experience it yourself, please do so. Just go outside while the game is downloading because you're about to stay indoors for at least a week. Alright, so that is the core foundation of the game covered, and I'm sure you get it. The game is made on a bed of granite and is held up with scaffolding made from love and titanium, but what about the most important part of any RPG? The character creation. Well, I'm glad I asked. What Larian have done here would get criticised in games from other AAA gaming companies, I'm absolutely sure of it. I don't mean to imply that Larian are favoured in any way or that there is some kind of EA hating conspiracy afoot. What I do mean is that there isn't some kind of wicked character creation engine filled with sliders that lets you perfect every individual detail. No, instead you have a pretty stock standard character generator that gives you precept options for every different race depending on whether you choose a masculine or feminine build. From here you can edit things like hair, skin, eye, and tattoo color, you can choose what shape penis you have or shape vagina you have, and there is even a randomizer that gives you some damn funky looking options.
Did I hear a rockin' stone?
Now when I said what was on offer here would get criticized in other games, this only happens because those games don't put in the effort to making the generator good. Too often you are given terrible options with no ability to make something unique to your vision. This is not the case here. While the generator isn't as in-depth as in other games, it has quality and care to it that just exudes passion in the work. You are able to create a character that you can be truly happy with. Moving on to the graphics now, and for the most part, Baldurs Gate 3 really is quite a good looking game. It is not the most graphically demanding game, mind you. I'm still to this day not sure what ray tracing is, but it doesn't have that after all. Now, I usually struggle to comment on and write a script for graphics in games because I genuinely don't care about them. Obviously, I enjoy games looking better, but amazing graphics have never resonated with me. What I'll say is this: the graphics are moderate to decent in a game that really doesn't focus on them at all. The art style is more often than not beautiful and the game looks sublime when you're exploring though. I don't think I remember a situation where I reacted with an ugh, and the textures, gonads, shadows, as well as all of the other tech buzzwords that people who love cyberpunk rave on about all do their job to create an immersive game that is a joy to experience. None of that negativity is accurate when discussing the spicy scenes, however. Yes, there are those. That is some high quality stuff.
Ay, caramba!
The intimacy coordinator did a fantastic job here. Moving on to the combat now, and quite frankly, it is awesome. The gameplay is highly tactical and heavily rewards positioning your characters and taking advantage of terrain and other environmental features, such as bottomless pits, to win encounters. Every class feels unique to play, and none of the classes, outside of the paladin, who can virtually one-shot bosses, feel either over or underpowered to the point where using anything else is just a silly idea. I have seen lots of discourse online about the combat though, and after doing quite an extensive amount of reading while procrastinating writing this script, I can say that a lot of the hate that is being thrown at the game's combat comes from two different camps. The first being the min-max group, who aren't fans of the RNG nature of dice roll based systems, and want more complex systems inside the game, while the second group believe the game is too hard, even on the lowest of its 3 difficulties. Now, I can honestly understand both of these lines of thinking, and rather than simply debunk them and move on, I'll comment on them briefly and then you guys can make up your own minds about them. To address the first one, the min-max discourse, it is interesting because I kind of agree, but I only agree in the same way that this criticism can be laid upon any video game ever. Like sure, Baldurs Gate 3 could be deeper with more systems, but on the same token, the Empire State Building could be 103 floors rather than 102 floors. Larian Studios have created a game that is a pretty damn good recreation and visualization of D&D in a video game. All of the base classes, weapons, abilities, and most of the spells are present and active. Larian takes this a step further and has added a lot of their own stats, gear, and other knickknacks that are aimed at giving players the ability to create their own builds that would never be realistically possible inside a proper D&D game. My friend, for example, has created a barbarian that blinds everything he encounters by throwing grapes at their head, only to then throw them off a cliff a moment later if they weigh anything less than a semi-truck. These kinds of things aren't usually possible in a normal D&D game, but Larian can do them since the game calculates all of the results for you. I guess the point here is that Baldurs Gate 3, to me anyway, is quite a deep game combat-wise. The issue that I believe these min-maxers have is that they simply do not like this kind of game. I don't think they're wrong necessarily, but I sincerely believe that the average casual gamer isn't going to notice something like this as even being close to being an issue. As for the second group of people who believe that the game is too hard, I actually far more understand this point of view. See, while adventuring, Larian has done their absolute best to make sure that you as the player are constantly being thrown new and interesting encounters. They want you to feel like you are a true adventurer, and that means feeling the sense of danger that someone wandering around in complete darkness through a temple dedicated to an evil god is going to experience. The problem that arises from this philosophy is that Larian have put in quite a few encounters that will completely surprise the unprepared. There are situations where exploding lava imps can simply fall on top of your head, a giant mole motherfucker can explode into the middle of your party, and more enemies can pile into a fight that you may have thought might simply be a case of whack a goblin. Now for me personally, I loved this. I'm no stranger to difficult games, and being placed in difficult situations is something I enjoy because I enjoy the challenge. I don't mind at all needing to reload a save or redo a challenging fight because I find that fun. However, I can totally understand how someone who's been wiped by an encounter that they weren't prepared for and lost an hour of progress because they didn't save it is upset by this kind of thing. Now I can say something like git guard or save the game more often than dickhead, but this isn't really going to solve the issue for those people who want a cruisy experience, since some of these encounters are genuinely difficult no matter how prepared you are or how low the difficulty is set. At the end of the day, I would say that for people who want a relaxed experience devoid of too much difficulty, then Baldurs Gate 3 may not be for you. I personally think it is at least worth giving it a go, but make your own decisions. For the people on the other end of the spectrum, then look at that. You've got a game that has the game is too hard discourse. You can masochist your way through and achieve as much catharsis as your little heart desires. Just don't play Paladin. Bosses go pop when you play Paladin. To continue discussing the actual combat, however, because boy did we take a left turn at Albuquerque there, it is, like I've said previously, amazing. No combat encounter in D&D would be complete without weird and wonderful ways to skip, avoid, break, or completely blow up any combat encounter, and nothing is ever going to compare to sheer imagination, but Larian do a genuinely fantastic job of creating all sorts of wacky and wonderful solutions that go far beyond simply smacking everything to death. Just a few include being able to convince multiple bosses to off themselves, being able to stack explosive crates just about anywhere, doing your best impersonation of Oppenheimer, and being able to win a combat simply by making the enemy laugh themselves to death. And this is just to scratch the surface. Don't want to fight past a beast that's guarding some treasure? Spawn a magic hand and throw that treasure out the window. Don't want to solve a puzzle in order to get to a specific area? Fucking don't. Just casually cast Featherfall on yourself and jump off a cliff to get there. The system isn't foolproof, and you will need to do quite a bit of fighting to play Baldurs Gate 3, but really, Baldurs Gate 3 is unmatched when it comes to player agency and creativity. Moving on now to what is probably the part that has clung to me the most after finishing this game, just ask my roommates about that one, the music. I can't really show too many examples since I am at the whim of the almighty content identification gods, but the composer, Borislav Slavov, has done a serene job with this playlist. Every track you come across feels perfectly placed for the situation you're in. The music sets the tone for the situation no matter where you are, and I can safely say no one aspect of Baldurs Gate 3 is more perfect than the sheer brilliance on display by Borislav, and I will be shocked if this soundtrack does not go down as one of the best of all time in video game history. Before I begin to talk about the unfortunate negatives that plague this otherwise perfect video game, I need to comment on the acting and voice acting because it is simply unreal. There is 174 hours of fully voice acted cutscenes that can potentially be seen in the game if you experience every single one of them. You won't do that, don't panic, but there's a lot of them. Now for the majority of these cutscenes, especially the ones involving the more central characters to the story, the actors are wearing haptic suits when delivering their lines. This means that not only are the characters very professionally acted, trust me, they are, but they look realistic and have realistic mannerisms that were given to them by the actors themselves. I saw one clip of one of the actors doing a read of Twitter posts in the voice of their character and thought, wow, she really knows how to do Shadowheart's mannerisms. Little did I know at that time, that's not because she was pretending to be Shadowheart, it's because she fucking was Shadowheart. It's now time to talk about what is inarguably the most important part of any RPG, the quests. I'm going to shelve the main quest for a hot minute and discuss the side content first, however, because this is where I believe the magic of Baldur's Gate 3 is well and truly alive. The exploration, discovery, campaign-spanning questlines, interesting NPCs to follow as they navigate the world, all of that culminates into something well and truly legendary. From the very first moments you step foot in Faerun, right up until you begin the main boss fight, you will be exploring the wonderful world that Larian Studios has created for you. You will have ups, you will have downs, and you really won't know where your decisions are going to take you until you have reached your destination. My advice for anyone thinking of playing or actively playing right now is to simply ignore the main quest until you have done absolutely everything that you can conceivably find, because you will be doing yourself a disservice if you rush this game and miss out on some of the stories that it has to tell. Spoiler alert for those who don't want to know anything about the main story, and I mean anything at all. I don't say anything specific regarding the events of the story, but if you want a blind experience, which is probably what a lot of people would prefer, skip ahead to the next chapter, because I get pretty brutal with this one. Anyway, as for the main story, well, this was really hard for me to chat about, since on one hand, I was really with the story right up until the end. I enjoyed the decisions I had made, and I was eager to see how different campaigns would play out for people who didn't enjoy stuffing their heads full of worms. As I was traipsing through Act 2, ready to head on into Act 3, I was already planning my next character, eager to experience the game through a fresh set of decidedly more evil eyes. This is unfortunately where the problem started, however. See, the story of the game is chock full of different characters trying to sway you to their way of thinking and their point of view. You are given the idea that your choices genuinely have an impact on the game, and you feel the pressure of every little decision as you are making them. You begin to side with certain NPCs over others, and honestly, you really start to rally behind the choices that the game tells you over and over and over again will matter one day. I bet you can barely imagine my utter disappointment then when I discovered that none of the major decisions you make in this game up until 2 hours before the campaign ends matter at all. I can hardly begin to describe how dissatisfying finishing this game and some of its other main story quests feel. I promise that I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that none of the supposedly big decisions you make mean anything by the end of the game. It really is crazy just how deflating the entire situation is, especially considering that the gravity and importance of your decisions is mentioned over and over and over again. Now, the story isn't all bad all of the time. In fact, it's the very fact that the story is good and has you excited for what comes next that causes the pain in the first place. Think of Game of Thrones Season 8. Multiple plots are built up, you meet interesting characters, and you really do feel like you're working towards something huge as you play through it all. Once you get to Act 3, however, all of this starts to fall to pieces. Part of the problem seems to be that the developers didn't want to lock players in when making their choices. They wanted players to be able to change their mind and experience all of the unique stories that the factions in the game have to offer. I understand what they went for here, but all it did for me was take away the impact of my decision making. It is deflating on both sides of the spectrum for me because A, players who make deliberate choices in their campaign from a roleplay point of view, like, not accepting gifts from a decidedly evil entity, are simply punishing themselves because there are no consequences for accepting those gifts in the first place. And B, players who try their best to go down one path of the story are super disappointed trying to hardcore go down that path, because going down that path does nothing to impact the overall story of the campaign because you can simply change your mind later. My god, this is tough to whinge about without spoiling it. I wanted to take a minute to mention now that there is potential hope on the horizon. See, there's been a lot of controversy around cut content from the game, mainly on Reddit, Land of the Nerd. Now, content being cut from a game is nothing new at all. Designs, concepts, and whatever else are always being made in games, and I assume, without being a developer at all, that very few of it actually makes it into a game. The issue here, however, is that the content that was cut from this game seems to have been cut very recently as June in fact, and appears to have butchered the main story and many of the side and companion quests in the game. Hell, even the end cutscene epilogues have been completely cut from the game, meaning you complete the game, your companion goes for a swim, and you're done. That's it. There's even a point later in Act 3 where you're walking towards a gate only to be told by the game that you can't go that way because you're not strong enough yet. But guess what? You never go to that part of the game. I have little doubt that entire sections of the story were cut because the ending being this dissatisfying after the rest of the game was that good just makes no fucking sense at all. Plenty of lists have come out to showcase the amount of stuff that data miners have discovered was cut, and some of this stuff would have been absolutely incredible to see in the game. I guess they just ran out of time or something after pulling the game forward a month? Funny that. The hope that I mentioned for this act comes from the fact that because this content was cut from the game pretty late into the development cycle, I can't see why at least some of it couldn't get added back into the game. It'll be too late for me, the taste will always be sour for me, but for those thinking about playing now or maybe in an upcoming patch, a few of these missing story tidbits and epilogues could get added back into the game. Hashtag justice for Karlach. Alright, so it's currently editor cam and I've just been editing the video and I've just seen that they actually are doing exactly what I've just said in adding some of the cut content into the game, such as epilogues, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but Karlach has been given justice, it seems. Just a little bit more Act 3 bashing ahead. Not too much, I promise. I just couldn't live with myself if I didn't mention the performance issues that come along with this act, especially when the first two acts are a bug-free, polished dream. For the first 50 to 80 hours, you can expect a bug-free experience at a smooth, quite high frame rate. This changes completely in Act 3. Not only does your performance absolutely tank, no matter what DLSS you turn on or how low you tune the settings, but it is also where the vast majority of my bugs showed up. Characters would react to events that didn't happen, NPCs in combat would use their entire turn simply standing still, random NPCs would constantly yell things like "go away" and "you don't belong here" for no seemingly good reason, quests just would not be completable, the list goes on and on and on. Compound this drop in quality and performance with the rushed disjointedness of the story in Act 3 and it's easy to see why I had such negative feelings towards the game after beating it. Please understand though that I don't just simply hate Act 3. In fact, Act 3 is where I had some of my most fun and most memorable moments. Some of the side content and side bosses you can fight in this act are second to none and you hit your character's power level here. Going up against heaps of high level enemies and coming out on top is a ton of fun, and honestly, Act 3 is also arguably the largest and the vibe it gives off is completely different to the other two acts in ways that really aren't all bad. There's definitely a lot of positives to take away from it, and even then I cannot forget the absolute 10 out of 10s that are Act 1 and Act 2, as well as the side content that really holds this game high in my regards. My second playthrough made me realise that your character has quite a lot of agency when it comes to the decisions inside side quests. It's just those massive, game-spanning main quest arcs that are the big disappointments, which is a shame, no doubt. Before I wrap up the video, I wanted to take some time to mention things that don't really fit into either the good or bad category gameplay-wise. First up, we have the game's length. It is no exaggeration to say that this game is long. People who don't have much time on their hands, such as brand new dads, will struggle to finish this one. If you do every bit of content you find, I would not be at all shocked if you hit 100, even 120 hours easily. Next up is the mods. Now, it is still early days, but Baldurs Gate 3 appears to be a game that will have some solid longevity. If not for the fact that it's amazing on its own, then for the fact that the modders have arrived in force. Already there are mods that give you a saiyan class, mods that give female bodies bigger badonkadonks, and even a mod that enables achievements when modding. I don't understand why developers do that. Let me have my character whack people naked while still earning achievements. It's not a crime, it's practically a human necessity. Free the nipple, am I right? Alright, so it is time to get to the final thoughts, and honestly, this one is easy for me. Baldurs Gate 3 is so astoundingly good for so many hours of its gameplay that to give it anything less than a highly recommended feels absolutely wrong. I have intentionally not watched or read any reviews from serious platforms yet, but I doubt they have been as critical as I have of its lower quality moments, and I still absolutely loved it. While playing the game and writing this script, I pondered the question of whether this is an industry shaker in the gaming sphere. You know, questions like, should other games strive to be like BG3, if not better? And the answer is simple. Yes, the sheer passion put into this project is absolutely clear. The reactivity, the player actions, sense of adventure and exploration, the combat and the encounters all combine to create a product that is an absolute joy to experience. In a world where it seems we are doomed to drown in a sea of NFT grifts and gotcha garbage, Baldurs Gate 3 is a light in the dark. If other game developers learn anything from Baldurs Gate 3, then they will have learnt something positive and the world will be better for it. Yes, the third act is a huge letdown in comparison to the rest of the game, but I refuse to allow it to dim my spirits any further. Baldurs Gate 3 is and probably will remain to be for some time one of the best experiences I have ever had in gaming, and I'm positive that it will only improve over time. It is for those reasons then that I can very easily say I highly recommend this game. Whether you choose to buy it now or wait for some patches, you will not regret your purchase nor your time spent playing this game. Folks, this has been the Aussie Perspective. Do not forget to like and subscribe, and most importantly, stay happy gaming.